Okay, good afternoon, everyone. This is Cheryl Welbeck, Project Manager for Directors of Health Promotion and Education, and welcome to today's webinar, which is a webinar covering complete streets. We have two presenters on the line with us today from Smart Growth America. Before we get started today, just a few reminders. Today's webinar will be recorded. We'll provide a link to the recording following today's webinar. And there's a control panel to your right. The control panel has an option for you to chat with any of the panelists or presenters. If you have a question that you'd like to pose, please put it in the question box and we'll get to those at the end of the presentation. If you have a technical issue during today's call, please send that through the chat box and I can help you address that. And with that, we will go ahead and get started today. Today's presenter is Beth Osborne. Beth is the Director of Transportation for America Consulting, and she leads Smart Growth America's multimodal development and delivery technical assistance program, working with transportation agencies and their partners to help update procedures and practices to implement a complete streets approach. She was previously at the U.S. Department of Transportation, where she served as the Acting Assistant Secretary for Transportation Policy and the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Transportation Policy since 2009. At DOT, Beth managed the Tiger Discretionary Grant Program, the Secretary's Livability Initiative, the development of the Administration's Surface Transportation Authorization proposal, and the implementation of MAP 21. Before joining DOT, Beth worked for Senator Tom Carper of Delaware as an advisor for transportation, trade, and labor policy, and as the Policy Director for Smart Growth America, and as Legislative Director for Environmental Policy at the Southern Governors Association. She began her career in Washington, D.C., in the House of Representatives, working as a legislative assistant and as a legislative director for a representative there. Beth, welcome to today's presentation. And with that, I will turn the presentation over to you.
Thank you, Cheryl. And thank you to everybody who has joined the webinar today. I'm excited to talk with folks in public health about this. It's a really important issue, and I find that a lot of people, while we spend a huge amount of our time in transportation, we don't often look around and think about how that system is affecting our decision making and our behavior, and can affect that in a very positive and a very negative way. So we are going to, press the right button. We are going to go through my presentation, which is talking about policy and implementation. What are complete streets? Why do we want to build complete streets? How can we build a policy that really supports the local environment? Some case studies, and then have a conversation about what this means in your work. All right, so first, what are complete streets? Back when I first started in this arena, we called this routine accommodation, which is a term that can only be invented by an engineer, because it sounds like it means nothing at all. Routine accommodation was replaced by complete streets because the idea is it is a street that is built to accommodate all the users of that street, whether they are in a car, whether they are in a truck, whether they are riding a bike or walking or heading to transit, whether they are 4 years old, whether they are 74 years old, and whether they are walking on their own 2 feet or in a wheelchair. It is meant to accommodate and move all the people in the community, no matter what state we find those folks in. This has not been the traditional way that we approach transportation. Particularly when it comes to surface transportation, our entire program has been built around the notion that our job is to move vehicles only, or at least vehicles primarily, and to move them quickly. And everything that we do in building those roadways, all of our design standards and our rules, our performance measures, are built around that notion, which leads to building wide, very high-speed streets that are quite hostile to anyone moving around outside of that car. But now there's a pretty strong movement across the country to complete the streets. States, cities, towns, businesses, real estate agents, and the community are calling on their planners and engineers and leaders to build roads that are safer and more accessible and easier to get around for everyone. And in the process, we're finding that they're creating stronger environments overall, both in terms of public health, the environment, and the economy. I'm afraid it looks like our picture has not come through. Well, another thing that I'd like to say about complete streets is a lot of times people talk about them as being safe, comfortable, and convenient for those who are walking around outside of a car. But again, they are to be complete. They are to take care of every user of the roadway, and that includes the automobile. It includes truck drivers, those beautiful little communities that you go to for a latte or for shopping. They require trucks to bring the goods to those facilities, and are just as important as the people and the customers that are trying to move around there. There we go. That's the picture I was looking for. Isn't that beautiful? What complete streets are not. Complete streets are not one special street project. It is a policy that infuses an entire transportation program. It's not getting it right in one place. It is not a replacement design prescription. To have a complete streets policy means that you're going to take the context of the community into consideration as you build the road. So just looking for one specific type of roadway and calling that a complete streets or a complete street truly misses the point. There are many ways to build a complete street. It is not a mandate. If you pass a policy, it's not a mandate to go back and retrofit all the streets in your community right now. It is more of a policy about how to address roadways as they come up for maintenance and replacement in their regular course lifestyle and lifetime rather. And it's also for new projects that are raised to make sure we don't double down on the mistakes of the past. It is not a program it's not a special program designed for just bike ped safety. And that's what we've done at the federal program, at the federal level. We have continued to build major highways even when it's in the wrong context for a major highway. And to address what we know is a wrong at the federal level, we create one little itty-bitty tiny bike ped program called the Transportation Alternatives Program, and we think that we have fixed the problem. We have not. And very importantly, it is not a silver bullet. You can build your roadway perfectly, but if you are not doing other things like thinking about land use around that transportation project or transportation demand management techniques, you will not get what you're looking for out of the roadway. So why are we talking about complete streets? There are several reasons. There's just a fundamental fairness discussion about it's the roadway and the purpose of transportation for all of us, and it should be available to all of us no matter how we're moving around it. It's good for safety. It's good for public health. We have found that it correlates very closely with stronger economies. In providing choices, this is extremely important because, quite frankly, this is what people are demanding in the marketplace right now. If you don't believe me, go look at real estate listings right now. A lot of times, realtors are listing walk scores to show how desirable the property they're putting on the market is. And we'll get into this more, but that's because there's way too many people that want to live in a walkable community and way too little supply. So if you actually have a home or a business in a walkable community, its value goes up. And lastly, it's good for the environment. It's not just good in that it can reduce emissions from vehicles, which is what most people think about improving the environment with transportation, but it's also good in that it often comes with less pavement and therefore less stormwater runoff. Another reason we need complete streets is our population has ever increasing demands for it. As there are people who do not have access to a vehicle, but as Americans age, they are living 11 years past their driving age. 1 in 3 Americans is 50 or over. By 2030, 1 in 5 will be 65 or over. more than 50% of non-drivers over 65 do not leave homes most days. And that is partly due to lack of transportation options. When we make it impossible for a non-driver, an elderly non-driver, to get around outside of a car, we make it impossible for them to leave their homes. More of the aging population is choosing to age in place. They find that they can live longer, healthier lives when they're not reliant on that car, when they can walk to a doctor's appointment or to be close to other people, to go shopping, to handle their necessities. There's also children can't drive. A lot of children, when I was young, I walked to school. In most parts of the country now, that would be crazy to let your kid walk to school. And that's not because of stranger danger. That's because one of the #1 causes of death and injury to children is cars. Not moving around in their neighborhoods leads to obesity, which puts them at higher risk for all kinds of problems. So if we want kids to live a healthy lifestyle, they probably need to have an ability to get to a place where they can move around without having to get into a car first. Additionally, there are people with disabilities who rely on these sorts of on this sort of infrastructure for access to opportunity, to medicine, to society, to their basic needs. And again, it's a huge demand. And what we're finding in a lot of cities that have either lucked into having good transportation because most of their city was built before the automobile, or cities that have gone out of their way to retrofit to be good for people outside of their cars, is that because the supply of these neighborhoods is so low, the people who get access to it are those with money, the people who have access to the most choices no matter what. And they're moving, they're putting such economic pressure on the community, it's becoming unaffordable for those that don't have access to a vehicle and most need them. So just as a supply and demand issue, we need to respond to what has been a very obvious market demand for well over a decade, and we've really not done enough to respond to. There's just tremendous potential. It's interesting, when you talk to federal highways, they will point out what a large percentage of trips are under 3 miles. What we often don't talk about is how many trips are under 1 mile. So 17% of trips are under a mile, and most of those are being made in a car. And I think about the neighborhood where my brother lives in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, where if he walks 2 blocks to the end of his street and looks to the right, 1 block away you see a grocery store. And he has never once walked there because it is so fantastically dangerous to walk on this, even 1 block on this road. And as a result, he drives 3 blocks away to go to the store. So we have great opportunity because we've messed up so many communities to such an extent. 1 little strip of pavement that allows him to walk safely on that rural route will result in 1 less trip by everyone in that neighborhood. We're talking about all this because current streets are inadequate, and I'm going to go through a few pictures here, but as you can see, in a lot of places people are expected to walk kind of exposed. And as you can see in this picture, there's an enormous amount of pavement that is dedicated to nothing. That costs an incredible amount of money to maintain, and as you can tell in the background, it's not maintained particularly well. And it's not particularly good for the environment. It puts a huge load on the stormwater system, especially if it's a piped system, which it probably is, in order to deal with runoff from a huge amount of roadway that's not used for much. Here's another example. This is something you'll see in most suburbs. And what's interesting about this picture is more than 40% of pedestrian deaths in 2007 and 2008 occurred where there is no crosswalk available. So we're talking about a little bit of paint between these people and the target that they are walking to. It is all that's standing in the way of saving lives. They're not, even in areas where you would expect to see bicyclists and pedestrians, it's not often designed well to explain to either the bicyclist or the motorist where everyone's supposed to go. And it's unfriendly. So here's a bus rider. He is standing out on a street corner with no buffer, with traffic that is going to be very high-speed traffic. That's probably 40-mile-per-hour traffic. There's no place to sit. There's no cover. When the bus comes, it's going to be blocking traffic, and there's no connection to the neighborhood around it. He's just supposed to be bushwhacking his way to the bus stop. And then we wonder why people don't like to go to those bus stops. And they are certainly inadequate for anyone that might have a mobility issue. And it's not just the person in the wheelchair. It's the person with a stroller. It's the person with a cart of groceries. It's the person who twisted their ankle last week playing soccer and is just having a little trouble getting around. We're not building it. What do you do when you're in a wheelchair and you come up on a corner like this? And this is a problem even if all the other corners are okay. This is still a barrier. This person's going to stay in the street to get where they're going. So we're going to talk about some of the benefits of a complete street approach. The first one is obviously safety. As I said, our streets are not particularly safe places. We have generally over 30,000 deaths a year, every year. And 676,000 people were injured during the 2003 to 2013 time frame. That means that there's a pedestrian death every 2 hours and a pedestrian injury every 7 minutes. So 30,000 people a year, and a bunch of them, it was almost 50,000 of them in a 10-year period, are dying outside of a car. And that's way out of scope considering how many people are traveling outside of a car. Generally, you're talking about single digits of people, 1, 2, 3% traveling outside of a car, but a huge number of them are dying when they try. We found, as I mentioned earlier, that complete streets are supportive of jobs and revitalization and increased property values. We actually have done a report called Safer Streets, Stronger Economies. Our Complete Streets side of our shop has done this. And there are a lot of studies out there these days that talk about this, about how bicyclists and pedestrians, they may not spend as much in one stop, but they tend to stop by stores more often and spend significantly more money at a shop over a year's time. I know that in my neighborhood in the middle of Washington, D.C., we have a Target. It was hard to get this Target to move into the middle of D.C. because it's not your traditional suburban development. And but they went ahead and did it. It's now their most profitable in the country, and it's led them to do a lot of urban Targets. And what they found is they do better having someone like me who stops by for 2 or 3 things every single week as I pass by than they do in the suburban development where someone drives out and fills up their trunk twice a year. And we've seen Walmart follow. It's good for the small shop owner. It's good for the large business owner. And here's some very specific information. I was mentioning earlier how many folks in real estate have paid attention to what an enormous difference walkability makes for home values and property values. A 1-point increase on walk score scale means $500 to $3,000 increase in home value. And walkable commercial neighborhoods in D.C. have 75% higher office rents. And across the nation, they tend to have as much as 20% higher office rents. So this is something that shows that we have a substantial demand for something, and we are not supplying what the market is looking for in terms of creating the infrastructure around business to support the way people want to interact with it. Frankly, people don't want to drive out someplace, park, and then have to pick up and move to every shop. They want to go and find a friendly, welcoming environment. Another benefit is just the fact that we're providing people with choices. Providing people with choices means we bring down the cost of transportation. Where you have choices, people spend less money on transportation. And while we spend a lot of time talking about healthcare costs, we rarely talk about transportation costs in spite of the fact that it's the second largest expense for families. And for very low income households, it's often the top expense for them. A lot of what lower income people do is move further and further from city centers looking for cheaper and more affordable housing, not realizing that the further they go, the higher their transportation costs go. And what we found during the recession was a huge number of the foreclosures happened in areas where people were shocked by the higher oil prices and they didn't have room in their budget to still get to work and maintain their job from their far out, less expensive homes. When I was at USDOT, we created a great tool called the Location Affordability Portal that is a joint project between USDOT and a U.S. Housing and Urban Development that shows the relationship between housing and transportation costs and how the further you go out of the city, the more expensive those transportation costs become. Other benefits, health. We all know that we have an obesity epidemic in the country, and the latest data show that 32% of adults are obese, and that number has nearly tripled since 1980. We know that one of the big factors is inactivity, and a lot of times in the coverage of this, we talk about people's inactivity as if it is a choice. But if you live in a neighborhood where 2 blocks from your home is a major arterial or highway where it would be dangerous to your life to go there, it's not a silly thing to stay close to home or only travel in a car. It is a life-preserving and health-preserving thing. Unfortunately, it's not a health-preserving thing over the long run to never move around. I remember my best friend talking about having to pile her daughter when she was an infant into the car to drive someplace to go for a walk. That is not unusual. That is the typical situation that Americans run into. And that has a direct impact on health. There's also other benefits of health other than just the physical activity. You have fewer pollutants in the air. That means less trips to the emergency room for asthmatics. You have less noise pollution. You have less stormwater runoff. So what the whole point of Complete Streets is that we are not doing transportation right. Surface transportation programs are not looking at the right things. And so I'm going to go through several slides talking about what transportation should do. And in all cases, I can say it is not doing now in most places. Transportation should be planned, designed, constructed, maintained to provide safe, convenient, welcoming access for all users. And that should be the default setting. We should start there and then talk about reasons why we might not do that. One reason we might not do that is we are trying to build a limited access highway and it's not really open to all users. But this is going to be the route through town that cars take as an expressway. But we should be justifying why we don't do this, not begging people to do it. A Complete Streets policy should make streets better every time you touch them. We are not talking about building streets and then going back and fixing them. That's an expensive way to do things. A Complete Streets approach fixes every project as it touches them. So, one example in San Diego is the Adams Avenue Pedestrian Improvement Project. Adams Avenue is a large, busy street that runs through 3 neighborhoods, including a neighborhood called University Heights. It serves approximately 8,300 vehicles per day, and although the posted speed limit is 30 miles per hour, most people are driving closer to 45 miles per hour. In the University Heights neighborhood, the fast-moving avenue keeps residents from their park. It's a trolley barn park, which sounds adorable. Before the avenue was retrofitted, pedestrians often had to dangerously cross 4 lanes of fast-moving, remember, 45-mile-per-hour traffic to get to their park. In 2004 and 2005, the city added a mid-block street crossing with a wide, high-visibility crosswalk and a pedestrian refuge island. The bright white painted stripes help change the image of the street and draw attention to the pedestrians that may be crossing. Now, this project cost $20,000, a small percentage of the total traffic calming budget for the city, which averages about $7 million per year. The Mid-Street Pedestrian Refuge Island provides a safe place for pedestrians to stop before they finish crossing the street. It reduces pedestrians' exposure to motor vehicles. It helps slow the vehicle speeds and get them to actually go the speed limit. And it draws more attention to those pedestrians. According to the president of Walk San Diego, the project has made a huge difference, calming traffic for 2 blocks, giving a whole neighborhood better access to its only park. Transportation should not do, the goal is not to do one great project. It is to gradually create a complete network of roads that serves all of its users. I find this a frustrating thing to talk about because this is the thing that I find that we have two minds about in transportation. Nobody would suggest that we should open discrete blocks to cars that then they basically run to the end of the road and then they have to go a mile before the road starts up again and expect a car to be able to get around that. But we do expect that for bicyclists and pedestrians. We expect a pedestrian to walk down one side of the street, cross the other side where the new sidewalk starts up, walk down a block, cross again, walk down a block, cross again. Oh, now there's no sidewalk for 5 blocks. Walk in traffic, get back on the sidewalk. We expect similar things with bicyclists, and we don't understand that for some reason that the transit user, the bicyclist, the pedestrian, the truck, the auto, they all need a full network. They can't just have 1 or 2 blocks that works for each one of them. Transportation should apply solutions across a community and address systematic inequalities. And this, it's very frustrating, I think, particularly for those working in suburban areas. Those suburban areas were places that were often refuges of the middle and upper classes for years. That is not the case anymore. We are seeing many people that do not have the ability to drive everywhere moving out to those suburbs where they are then cut off from non-auto trips because there's just no safe way to get around outside of your auto. At the same time, we have this huge movement back to traditional communities and urban centers and also suburban centers that have a very walkable feel. And in doing so, with all this demand and so little supply, again, we're driving up property values so that the people who are most vulnerable, who are most in need of non-auto transportation, are the least likely to be able to afford the access to it. So we have to think about giving access to everyone who needs it and making sure that it is equally available no matter the income. And this is a big one. Transportation should be coordinated with land use. I will fully admit that transportation engineers have not done what they need to do, but they can do everything perfectly. And if you build sidewalks and bike lanes on the road that I am showing you here, you are not going to get a lot of bicyclists and pedestrians, and that is because of the land use surrounding it. The land use surrounding it is clearly communicating to everybody that the priority is the car. The storefront is not, sorry about that, the storefront is not up against the roadway. It is the parking lot that is up against the roadway, and in many developments, it's a good quarter mile of parking before you actually get to the front door. And as I said earlier, there's a lot of different ways to build complete streets. Context matters in how you build the complete street and what it means to give folks access to the roadway. So in rural areas, you might have a road like I'm showing you that has a great amount of space on the side of it, just on a shoulder. And that is a very welcoming environment for the bicyclist. Even in 45-mile-per-hour traffic, there's a good amount of space. That can be a complete street, especially in rural areas that may not have a lot of traffic. You may not need a lot of space and separation between the bicyclist or the pedestrian and the traffic. And those shoulders are also very handy for motorists who need to pull off and get out of the road because of problems. So it can be multiple purpose. The American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials have written a guide for the development of bicycle facilities, and it recommends adding paved shoulders to rural roads. And to do so in order to accommodate bicyclists. They create space, and because these groups are not competing for space at different travel speeds, paved shoulders help improve safety for all. Shoulders are often a useful tool, like I said, for people who need to pull off, and many states are trying to do this regardless, whether or not there are bicyclists in the area, but then it could be there to take care of the bicyclist. Here's another rural complete street. And you can see they've got a greenway off to the side and small shoulders, but again, that can be complete. Here's one in a residential area, but you can tell that this is a very low traffic roadway. You don't need to have separate facilities for your bicyclists and pedestrian where you're going to have cars only going about 15 miles per hour. They can share the space. Here's a complete street with a narrow local street. And again, a bicyclist can share space with either the pedestrians or the cars because you don't have a lot of volume and it's very narrow, so the cars are going to be moving very, very slowly. Neighborhood greenways are a slow-speed, low-volume street, good for low-volume streets where neighborhood residents who are walking or biking are even given priority. Designing streets as neighborhood greenways reduces automobile speeds and cut-through traffic. And the idea is this is not an area for you to drive quickly through. This is a destination point, and therefore the people who live there, who move around there, who want to spend time there are the priority, not the cars trying to go quickly. In developing neighborhood greenways, planners and designers utilize tools such as special signage, bicycle-friendly speed bumps, and traffic barriers. And they're an opportunity for great landscaping, public art, community space. In Portland, Oregon, planners utilize a variety of infrastructure tools to develop an extensive neighborhood greenway that allows bicyclists comfortable and safe ways to move through the city, including crossing larger streets. Here is your more traditional complete streets, a main street through town. I find that a lot of advocates see this picture and view this as the design for a complete street, and they try to take this design and overlay it on everything I've shown you up till now. That is every bit as much of a mistake as trying to make every road a highway. And another complete street is a modern roundabout, which is getting a lot of attention these days for intersection work. They're effective tools to manage traffic coming off of highways and going into a much slower traffic environment. We found that they have dramatic effects on reducing severe traffic accidents, up to 82% when converting from a two-way stop control mechanism, and up to 78% when converting from a signalized intersection. So Federal Highways has really taken notice, and they're pushing roundabouts. So moving into the policy of complete streets, how do you develop the right policy? So as we talked about before, complete streets policies are ones that ensure that the entire right-of-way is planned, designed, constructed, operated, and maintained to provide safe access for all users. All of those terms are important. We find communities that have done well in one area, not the other, and it falls apart. You can plan a great complete street, and then the engineer comes in and says it doesn't meet design standards and design it not to be complete. You can design it properly and you can construct it poorly. You can operate it in a way that even though it's designed theoretically for all users, it's not operating well for all of them. And the biggest thing that we happen is you don't maintain it for all users. So snow comes in and there's no place for the bicyclist or pedestrian, but there is a place for the car. It has to go through all segments of the project development process. And there's really a growing movement for complete streets. As you can see, the number of places that have adopted these policies has gone up. Now, I will be completely honest that the quality of each of these varies, but you can tell the growing number of areas that know they need to do something. And the policy types are a broad range. We've got everything from legislation to an executive order to internal policies. There's any number of ways that these can be adopted and enforced, and it often comes from where the leadership is in the community. It's happening at all layers, at all levels of government. A lot of folks think, oh, this is something the cities are doing, and certainly a large number of cities have done them, but a large number of counties are doing them, and MPOs are adopting them, and 30 of our states have done it. And for those that think that this is something you just find on the coasts, that's not true. You really see a huge portion of them in the Midwest and in the South, where frankly they're truly, truly needed. That's the area of the country I'm from. They definitely need them down there. And for those that think it might just be large communities, it's not. There are a lot of small towns that feel like, well, the small towns that want to regain a small town feel, and then you've got those first-ring suburbs that recognize that the demand is moving more towards that traditional downtown feel, and they're retrofitting their community towards it. So here are several pieces of an ideal complete streets policy. It sets a vision, which means it tells the community what it is we are trying to achieve. It talks about and includes all users. A lot of times people talk about it in terms of bike ped. It's about more than bike ped. It's about cars and transit and trucks. It applies to all phases of the project. We're not going to plan for everyone and design for some. It specifies and limits exceptions. Again, it makes accommodating everyone the default. It emphasizes connectivity. It's no good to have a couple blocks of great complete streets that aren't connected to other great complete streets. It's understood by all agencies to cover all roads. This is a fascinating thing. It's amazing how many agencies manage roadways. It is not just the Public Works Department or the Transportation Agency. It is often the parks. And I ran into this at the federal level, where we had the National Park Service and the Interior come into USDOT and say, we need your help to give access to parks. And we pointed out that some of the roads that were making it impossible for people to access parks were their roads, or people were getting access to parks and then they were unable to get through the parks because the parks themselves had not managed the roadways appropriately. So this is not just for public works. This is not just for transportation. It's across the board. We use the best and latest design standards that are flexible. This is a difficult one, and I was just in Minnesota talking with folks about this very issue. And they understand that it has to be flexible, but their engineers often need the certainty of a dictated design standard. And this can be tricky. So it may be something where you have five or six standard complete streets designs with some specifications about what sort of community they're used in. So you're not saying complete street is only one thing in all contexts, but you're giving people some greater guidance. It complements the community's context. So a rural route is going to be a complete street in a totally different way than a roadway that goes through Times Square. It complements, I already said that, it sets appropriate performance measures. So as we are building these, we should look at what we want to have come out of it. Are we looking for redevelopment? Are we looking for greater bike ped share of the mode split? And measure it and let everybody know what we're going to consider to be a failure. Is it a success or a failure that you built 70 miles of bike lanes if nobody uses them? So thinking about what we're trying to accomplish and setting the right performance measures matters. And it's very specific in how it should be implemented. We're not just going to write a policy that sits on the books and that doesn't have any dictates that could actually change the product. So as I mentioned earlier, we have a bunch of very specific case studies in our document, Safer Streets, Stronger Economies, that came out in March of this year. And we're going to talk about some of them now. We, in this study, looked at 37 projects and found that the Complete Streets projects did indeed improve safety for all users. It tended to lead to an increase in bike and pedestrian use, and it showed a mix of increases and decreases in automobile traffic, depending on the project goal. This is an interesting finding, I think, because a lot of people believe Complete Streets are designed to get rid of cars. It's really designed to give access to everyone, including the car. So there are plenty of examples of Complete Streets that, even though an entire lane has been taken away and lanes have been narrowed, has just as much car traffic as it ever had before. What I find as a driver is just because something is auto-centric does not actually make it auto-friendly. And a lot of times drivers like the Complete Street context better. Compared to conventional transportation projects, these projects were remarkably affordable and were inexpensive ways to achieve their goals, and were usually linked with improved health outcomes. More people walking and biking can improve a street's throughput. So even talking about very traditional engineering standards, you're moving more people through the corridor because you can move people in ways other than one person per car. And in terms of economic returns, while we had some limited data, it does suggest that Complete Streets were related to broader economic gains like increased employment and higher property values. So, example number one of economic development. Edgewater Drive in Orlando, Florida, acts as a main street for a neighborhood called College Park, which is 4 miles north of downtown Orlando. When the street was scheduled to be resurfaced in 2001, the community saw an opportunity to reinvent the area into a vibrant, pedestrian-friendly commercial district with cafes and shops. The City of Orlando proposed a 4 to 3 lane conversion for 1.6 miles between Parr Street and Lakeview Street, adding bicycle lanes, a center turn lane, and wider on-street parking. With resident input, the City of Orlando devised an extensive series of performance measures to monitor the project's progress. I can't tell you how unusual this part is. People build transportation and rarely go back to see if they got what they meant to get. But a lot of these Complete Streets projects, because they have to justify their existence in doing something differently, have done so. The measures that they looked at were travel times, traffic volumes for all modes, safety-related crash and injury rates, and speeding data. So the newly improved street was clearly safer than before. Total collisions dropped 40% from 146 to 87 annually. And this is something we find is often the case. We tend to do this for bicycle pedestrian safety, but it tends to be much safer for the automobile as well. The crash rate was nearly cut in half, from 1 crash every 2.5 days to 1 crash every 4.5 days. Injuries fell by 71%. The safety findings are particularly impressive considering that automobile traffic only decreased 12%. So they got a 71% decrease in injuries with only a 12% decrease in driving. And bicycle counts surged by 30% with pedestrian counts going up 23%. As a result, more people want to be on Edgewater Drive. The corridor has seen 77 net new businesses open and 560 new jobs created since 2008. Average daily automobile traffic, which saw a slight dip following project completion, has returned to its pre-project level, and on-street parking use has gone up 41%. The most dramatic results, however, were in long-term real estate and business investment. Since the project was first proposed, the value of property adjacent to Edgewater Drive has risen 80%, and the value of property within half a mile of the road has risen 70%. The street was resurfaced again in 2012, and no one suggested that it should go back to its original configuration. Another example in Seattle, Washington. This is another example of fewer collisions and injuries in Seattle, Washington. There were 3 projects within a particular area, one on a street called Nickerson, one on Northeast 125th, and one on Stoneway. All 3 projects were aimed at reducing speeding by automobiles and making the street more inviting for pedestrians and bicyclists. All 3 projects used similar design changes to achieve these goals. They reduced the number of travel lanes from 4 to 2. They added a center turn lane. They added bike lanes and new crosswalks. In all 3 cases, speeding, collisions, and injuries decreased after the project's completion. On Nickerson Street, speeding fell by 2/3 after the complete streets improvement, and total collisions fell by 23%. On Northeast 125th Street, the number of drivers speeding excessively decreased by 11%, and collisions fell by 10%. And the collisions resulting in injury fell by 17%. On Stoneway North, speeding drivers decreased 75%. Total collisions fell 14%, while collisions involving pedestrians declined by 80%, and collisions resulting in injuries fell by 33%. The Seattle Department of Transportation completed all 3 projects, which are part of a citywide effort to implement its 2007 Complete Streets Ordinance. The policy vision, as well as a Complete Streets checklist within the department, have helped SDOT remain focused on these goals. Quote, this is a quote from Seattle DOT, "Not only does redesigning our streets make them safer, it keeps people and goods moving." One thing that I think a lot of people don't realize about transportation is the way we design roadways can sometimes be circular logic that leads in the exact wrong way. So we design our road, then we observe vehicle streets, then we set speed limits. We don't actually say, this is a residential community and we don't want cars to go more than 25 miles per hour, so we're going to design the roadway to make it comfortable at 25 miles per hour and uncomfortable when you speed. And a lot of what Complete Streets does is redesigns that roadway so that it's comfortable when people decide to drive the actual speed limit. Here's some other pictures of this project areas in Seattle before and after. And you can see in a lot of these cases it's resurfacing and paint. They're not exorbitant cost. Okay, example number 3, redevelopment in Dubuque, Iowa. I gotta say, Dubuque, Iowa has been one of the most innovative cities on this across the country. When I was at USDOT, we funded a project there to rebuild their historic millwork district, all the streets, to be more accommodating to bicyclists and pedestrians. I've been extremely impressed with them. So when Dubuque, Iowa was planning this redevelopment, they knew that the project's success hinged on whether or not people would want to walk or bike there. Their whole goal was to reclaim this area as a neighborhood. This is an area where they had dozens of mills. Some of these mills had actually built buildings through the street, cutting the millwork district off from the neighborhoods on the side of them. The mills were the priority. So as they were reclaiming these roadways, they knew they were looking to build lofts and condos, and the way they were going to get people to move into them was to have lots of retail and restaurants, and have lots of retail and restaurants, someone has to be able to walk to something. So They took a look at 4 of their main streets, Jackson, Washington, 9th, and 10th, and figured out how to make them work for people outside of the car. They replaced sidewalks, they made it easier to cross the street in many places. They added new street lights. They created a multi-use trail. And within a year, bicycling use increased by 273%. And that was really just the beginning. Since the project's completion, the neighborhood has experienced more than $34 million in new private investment, with another $150 million in the pipeline. The first warehouse to be redeveloped is leasing 72 residential units, 39,000 square feet of retail and commercial space, and 20,000 square feet for an incubator for arts and nonprofit organizations. I've been there. It is beautiful. It's an incredible building. They've also recently attracted IBM to put over 1,000 new jobs there. And one of the reasons they put them there is they said young, talented people want to be able to live someplace where they can walk to work, and then after work be able to walk to get something to eat or a beer. So that leads us into the part where you all get to talk back to me and talk about some of the big questions, which I've to get the conversation started, I've got some examples of what those might be. What are the biggest barriers that your community is facing? What are the local opportunities to raise these issues? What are the key steps your community can take to implement a complete street? Are you looking at doing this through legislation or an executive order and internal policy? And what are the interest groups that need to be brought to the table to make something like that happen? And with that, I would love to open up for conversation.
Okay, thank you, Beth. I'm actually gonna unmute lines. Attendees on the call, if you wish to mute your lines, or if you wish to not have your lines unmuted, you do have the option to do that. Okay, one moment here. Okay, folks on the call, you're invited to either type your question into the chat box, and actually an easier way to do this. There we go. Okay, so you're invited to either type your question into the chat box, or right now all of the lines are unmuted. So please feel free to speak freely if you wish. Okay, does anyone have questions for Beth Osborne? Does anyone want to share what barriers your community might be facing related to complete streets? Okay, while we are waiting for folks to collect their thoughts, make sure there's a slight echo on the line. Let me adjust the volume here. Okay, so while we're waiting for folks to collect their thoughts, Beth, I had a couple of questions about the presentation, which was very interesting, especially all of the examples that you gave, and particularly the images and the case studies. Typically, how do communities prioritize which areas or streets they're going to start with for a complete street type project? Beth, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was having trouble understanding.
Okay. Okay, I can repeat the question. I was saying, typically, how do communities determine how to prioritize the streets that they're going to start with?
Yeah, it's mostly opportunistic, I think. What I think happens is someone realizes that an area through a commercial district or some area that they're trying to revitalize is up for a resurfacing or rebuilding, and someone has an idea of how they want that to go. They've recognized that that roadway is a barrier to the commercial strip success. A lot of times it was an area that used to be a beautiful complete street, and as the former mayor of Rochester, New York once said to me, in the 1950s and 60s, the engineers came into my downtown and they told us we had to widen the roads and speed up traffic so people could evacuate in case of an emergency, and that's just what they did. They evacuated, and they never came back to my town. I want to shrink these roads right back down and get them caught here so they can stay and spend all their money. So a lot of times it's going back to the way the roads were originally built, and someone remembers what it used to be like and what the commercial strip was like before the goal was getting cars past the commercial strip as opposed to the commercial strip. Sometimes it is opportunistic in that it's an area that has a high level of accidents, of crashes. They should never be called accidents because they're not. A lot of times it's designed to be dangerous, whether we like to admit that or not. So they want to fix a problem that they have seen for years in an area that it's just been extremely unsafe. Or maybe it's an area where a bunch of crashes have happened recently. This is happening in a lot of suburban areas when an area may have once been upper middle class and has been replaced by folks that just cannot afford one car for every single human being over 16 in their house. And so they've got one or two or three or four people who are trying to get around by foot, and in doing so, what didn't used to be a crash site becomes a crash site. And so the way it gets prioritized, like I said, it tends to be whatever led to people understanding that they had a problem in the first place, and it's somewhat opportunistic.
Okay, thank you. Okay, now there's actually two new questions here. The first states, you mentioned the importance of the context of the neighborhood. Have you seen good examples of a street classification system that recognizes the context and incorporates differing design standards for the street based upon the context?
That is a fantastic question. This is something that's being talked about more and more. And I have seen discussions of ways to think about context as you are building out a design. So I'll mention a few things. One is there is the NACDO design guide, the National Association of City Transportation Officials, that is showing folks using standards that is in the, quote, AASHTO Green Book, which is the roadway design Bible for most engineers. The NACDO design guide talks about ways to use those design rules that are better for non-motorized movers, and it talks a lot about context. There's also a lot of resource at federal highways on context-sensitive solutions is what they call it, and that's about how to consider context for all kinds of projects. And I'd also say in California, like the Sacramento area, they've gone through the effort of actually categorizing all the communities around there, you know, whether it's meant to be a city center or a small town center or a agricultural area or whatever it is, and there are certain investment priorities and rules that flow from that designation, which is quite interesting.
Okay, thanks, Beth. And the second question here is, has anyone used the percent of truck traffic as a measure to determine bike lanes, protected bike lanes, or off-street facilities for bikes?
That's a very good question. I think it's more about the speed of those trucks than the percent of the trucks. A lot of what you have to do when you're designing a complete street is think about that very issue. While a lot of folks that want to build these cute little streets with locally owned businesses are excited about that, what they don't realize is when you're not working with the big box stores, you don't have local distribution facilities. So those cute little mom and pop shops tend to have more trucks that have to come to them. And but it's really a matter of the traffic speed and volume than necessarily the percentage of it that is trucks. And as you're developing these areas, particularly when they're mixed use area, there needs to be a very robust conversation about where the trucks are going to go. Are you steering the through traffic around that community? The ones that have to come to the community, are you creating loading facilities, maybe in alleys or specific loading docks within a building? Are you expecting deliveries to happen at night? That's great for traffic flow. That's not great for residents. Residents don't appreciate a loud beep, beep, beep noise for trucks backing up in the middle of the night. And so figuring out what is appropriate for that neighborhood is a big part of the conversation. And sometimes it's part of the roadway, and sometimes it's part of the commercial development. And so again, it has to be done in conjunction with land use and building design in order to get it right.
Okay. Okay, Beth, the next question here. You mentioned in the presentation that people are 65% more likely to walk in neighborhoods with sidewalks and completed streets. Are there other models or suggestions for ways to encourage more people to walk?
Yeah. So again, sidewalks may be a big part of it, and crosswalks. There's a whole conversation about things like traffic speed and how separated the pedestrian has to be from higher speed traffic. Though, as someone who is a daily pedestrian, I can tell you I just don't tend to walk near high speed traffic. I think that's true across the board. A big part of it is the land use. People don't like large stretches of no destinations. So big box stores that you have to, walk several city block lengths to get across before you get to the next destination tends to just look unfriendly. So having the land use built in a way that is accessible and of human scale is really, really important to getting people to walk. I mean, frankly, it's just less boring to look at. And then there's some things there's been a decent amount of research about some of the amenities, like people are more willing to walk where there are trees. Part of it is cover from the sun. Part of it is it's prettier to walk where there are trees. People tend to walk more where there are streetlights and benches and things like that. But to be honest, people tend to walk where there are people. So you're really trying to create a virtuous cycle. And a lot of that is, convincing the cafe to open with outdoor cafe seating. Things like that. People need to see other people. That's what's going to make them walk. So you create a virtuous cycle as you get a couple things right.
Okay, thank you. Okay, the next question here. There was a graphic with a map showing the number of communities adopting complete street policies. What happened in 2008-9 that caused the spike in the adoption of policies? It jumped from 60-something to 82 and then to 136 or so.
Yeah. I mean, to be quite honest, I think the movement just started to get better press. I mean, at first, back in 2005, I was in the room when we came up with the term complete streets. And when we decided routine accommodation just was not going to inspire anybody to do anything, and complete streets just had a better ring to it. And then we had to brand this sucker and go talk to people about it and come up with policies that were examples and get a few places to adopt them. And we got some of the low-hanging fruit, the folks that were kind of chomping at the bit naturally to adopt them. And then when they adopted them, they built some great projects, and then those got great press, and then as those got more press, more people wanted to talk about the policies, and it just, the momentum built and built. But I think what you're seeing is that natural progression of momentum. It wasn't that there was anything, passed at the federal level, really. We got some of our first good language on complete streets in the bill that was signed into law last week. You know, after doing this for 10 years, we finally got the feds to come up with some policy to back it up. I think in a couple of those places, we found a state adopt a policy and then a whole bunch of locals would follow behind them. But frankly, it happened just as much the other way, where a bunch of locals did it and then the state said, well, you know, I need to be a partner in this. So, yeah, I think it's just the natural progression of something catching on that you're seeing there.
So it sounds almost like a ground up progression is what you're
It
describing.
definitely was very grassroots move.
And then I think, Beth, your last question on your slide actually kind of hints to a question that I had kind of jotted down, because a lot of the folks who are working on this particular initiative are tasked with working within a coalition. Who would you recommend to have at the table in planning and designing complete street type projects?
Yeah, and again, this, I don't want anyone to feel like this is a hard and fast list, but here are groups that are handy. Certainly your elected representatives. So city councilmen, mayor, congressmen, legislators, those folks have an ability to rattle cages in a way nobody else does, so getting them involved helps a lot. I think also most communities have bicycle pedestrian groups. Getting them involved is really important. And then it's getting people from outside the transportation world involved, folks from public health, education. It's interesting. So I just was talking to a former city councilman who said some of the worst transportation decisions he ever encountered were at the behest of schools. You know, a school that insisted that the playground be eaten up for teacher parking, and therefore the kids had to walk farther. The kids had to cross streets to get to parks, or they had to locate the school across the highway from the neighborhood that it took care of. There's an example of this in Maryland, suburban Maryland, where they're having to bus kids from a neighborhood directly across a street from a school, across the street to that school, because the roadway is too dangerous to cross. But the school district thought it was a great idea to put the school there because it was a big a big tract of open land. So getting those folks involved and inside the tent is very helpful, because they can be a big problem if they're not a part of the movement. Who else, Rayla? Who else is good to have at the table? Parks. Yeah, I think the parks folks are always helpful, and they're often excited that people remember to bring them into this discussion. They find sometimes they're a source of really good examples of particular roadways that desperately need fixing, that are a true barrier to access to their facilities. Businesses, the business community. I think the business community, because they have to pay so much attention to profitability, are often ahead of government on this. But that's not always the case. And sometimes if there's going to be a change to on-street parking, you will find some businesses that are reticent to make that change because they believe that their business's success will live or die based on whether or not they have 2 parking spots right in front of their facility, in spite of the fact that they need a lot more than 2 customers. And what I've seen some communities do in that situation is there's a group called Team Better Blocks that comes in and will redesign a strip of roadway for just a weekend under a special event permit as part of a street festival, basically, and show people what it's like. And oftentimes they'll convince the most skeptical business owner to utilize their parking for either display or for people, that maybe it's a cafe or something like that. And what they find is the single best way to invite people into your shop is to have people standing outside of your shop. And that's 1,000,000 times better for business than having 2 cars parked in front of your spot. So then when the community comes back and says, we want to make this permanent, it's a really easy sell. One of the things that I have to remind myself continuously is normal people do not spend their days obsessing about things like parking standards and lane widths. That's what I do. And so a lot of times the average person has to interact with what you're talking about before they feel comfortable with the change. And so having all those, not just your supporters, but your skeptics, get involved and get a chance to feel what you're talking about, to go visit a street that did it right, to try something out on a temporary basis to see if they like it, can be a really important part of that process.
Thanks for that quick list, Beth. Question about, was it Team Better Blocks? Was that the name of the?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. How about the opposite side of the coin? Who generally presents the most opposition to complete street projects?
That's a fantastic question, and it's not always who you think. Sometimes it's drivers. I know that Indianapolis has done some incredible work on their downtown in building a greenway and taking whole lanes out of circulation for cars and expanding their sidewalks and bike lanes. They call their Monon Trail their beachfront property because every developer in the city wants to build along it. It's so popular. But the mayor will tell you that he, for years, ran into motorists who were angry that they had to drive slower through their downtown. And they would come to him and they would yell at him and say, you're slowing down my trip. You're making it take longer. And he would basically say, you're welcome. You're right, because I'm trying to make it safer so that you don't die on that roadway. And I accept your thanks. You know, you do need that kind of strong leadership to deal with those folks that don't like change and are inconvenienced. I hate to say it, but the fire chiefs are often one of your biggest problems, especially on narrow roads. They have this belief that 2 fire trucks need to be able to pass each other on every single roadway going top speed. I can't imagine how you would dispatch 2 different fire trucks going in exact opposite directions down the same residential street at top speed. Seems like you've messed something up pretty substantially if you're doing that, but that's what they believe. And so a lot of times the way you overcome that is you say, you are right. I want to make sure fire trucks can get absolutely everywhere in town. So I'm going to meet you at the Walmart parking lot, and we are going to set up cones designed exactly like the street. And I want you to bring your drivers, and I want to see if they can drive through this, because if they can't, we're going to redesign it. And it turns out that no fire truck driver wants to be seen as not being able to drive through anything, and so you almost never have that actual problem.
Wow.
But you have to show it. You'll also hear it sometimes from folks that are worried about trucks. I don't actually hear it from the truckers as often as those who claim to be speaking on behalf of trucks. Trucks are often used as an excuse. The only way to accommodate a truck is apparently to build a highway, which is not true, but that's there. It just seems to be in the psyche. So, you know, again, saying, well, we let's bring a trucker in. Let's get a sense of what is manageable and what is doable, and turning it around on them and saying, not only do we need to make sure that they can drive through this area, we need to make sure that they can deliver in this area. So, you know, you might point out where the current design, especially for high-speed throughput, does not really create a good place for a truck to stop and do delivery. And sometimes these drivers are being put in quite perilous circumstances where they're having to be the pedestrian making the delivery across high-speed traffic because there's no way to park. So kind of talking through those issues can help. And again, the businessman who is afraid of the change, because there are some folks in business that think that having traffic move through your community at high speed is somehow good for their business, in spite of the fact that no one window shops going 40 miles per hour. Or if they do, they don't tend to do it very safely. So, you know, again, giving them a chance to interact with what the change will mean and what it will feel like, either by bringing them to a complete street that's worked or giving them a chance to feel it on a temporary basis can be quite helpful. Though I think most of the time the business community writ large is very supportive. It's just 1 or 2 shop owners that will be nervous about the change.
Those are really concrete examples of how to handle some of the opposition, especially with like the fire trucks or having people test out the widths in a large parking lot, or actually take a look at what a complete street would look like and provide those type examples. Those are really good.
Good. And I will say, every now and then, you will run into the folks that fear something called Agenda 21. I don't know if you all hear about this, but apparently the UN is trying to take over local streets. And the way they're going to do it is they're going to make it safe for people to walk and bike on them. And that's the sign of the great takeover. Being prepared for that, gang, is important. And the way you prepare for them, because you're not going to be responding with thoughtful, fact-based information, because that's not what they're fighting with. It's more about demonstrating the demand so that you can talk past those people to the other people in the room.
Okay, good advice. Last call for anyone on this phone call, any of the participants, to submit a question to Beth Osborne. Okay, and if there are no other questions, we can probably wrap up for today. Beth, thank you for a great presentation, very engaging, and great suggestions and answers to some of the questions that we had on today's call. As mentioned earlier,
our follow-up questions, I just want to let you all know that we are certainly available to answer those questions. We do trainings for communities on complete streets. We also do trainings for transportation agencies on how to implement a complete streets policy once it's adopted. So if there's folks that want more information about those sorts of services, or just have questions and follow-up from this, we're always available.
Okay. Thanks for providing that information. And for all the participants on today's call, thank you for your time this afternoon. With that, we're going to go ahead and wrap up for today. Have a great afternoon, everyone.